Good afternoon and welcome to this seminar titled Greenland's Minerals and China's Green Energy Dominance. My name is Hans Lugt and I'm a senior researcher here at DIIS. Today we will be discussing, among other things, our recent DIIS policy brief on the subject of rare earth elements in Greenland that I have co-authored with Chief Advisor Per Kalvig from the Geological Survey of Greenland and Denmark, or GEOS. The brief and the seminar are part of the Defense and Security Studies here at DIIS, funded by the Danish Ministry of Defense. Rare earth elements, or REEs, are vital for modern technology, defense, and the green transition, and therefore Greenland's rich deposits have attracted a lot of international attention in recent years, especially since REEs are almost exclusively produced in China. What does this mean for Greenland, for European industries, and for the question of the green transition and global energy security? These are some of the broader questions that we look at in the policy brief. Obviously, there's been a significant political development in Greenland since we wrote the policy brief. IA, the left-wing political party running on a platform to stop Quanasuit Kvanefjeld mining project out of environmental concerns, has won big in Greenland, casting once again this question of the mining project into doubt. So here today, to discuss these important issues further, we have gathered a great panel of experts. First, my colleague, Chief Advisor Per Kalvig from GEOS, one of our leading experts on REEs in Denmark, will present and discuss the findings in the policy brief. Then we have the director for the Arctic Economic Council, Mads Kvist Frederiksen, who will give us a perspective from the Danish and European industries. Mads is also a former senior advisor on Arctic affairs for the Confederation of Danish Industry. Then Associate Professor Jesper Zeuthen from Aalborg University, who is an expert on China and has published widely on Chinese rare earth politics and strategies. We'll discuss the seminar theme as viewed from China. And finally, our own senior researcher, Ulrik Pram Gade from DIIS, will address the Greenlandic perspective. As mentioned earlier, a lot has happened here since the election last week that has direct implications for future rare earth mining in Greenland. Finally, we have about 30 minutes of discussion, and you are most welcome to pose questions in the Q&A functions as we go along. But please, Per, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hans. And good afternoon to this big audience. It's a great pleasure to understand that it has attracted such a great interest. I will start. If this works, it doesn't.
Her ellers så brug cursoren i nederste venstre hjørne af din skærm på sliden. Der.
Excuse me. So I will start with this generic diagram, which in cartoon shows the, excuse me, I need a little bit of water. How we actually are supplied from our daily life with cars and buildings and roads and electronics and energy, etc., which all stems from mining. And mining actually comes after mineral exploration, and mineral exploration, there needs to be a lot of mineral exploration in order to create a feasible mine. We normally say approximately 1 per mil of exploration projects become a mine. And in order to treat some of the ore material from the mine, it's normally shipped somewhere for further treatment, for processing, refining, and to process the the ore material, so we can get the raw materials for the industry, which can manufacture these into all the goods we need. But if we look at this automobile, then it's not only one mine. Probably more than 40 mines will be required in order to come up with this automobile. So it's a very, very complicated system, and it's actually relying on that we are trading. Each company and country is trading across the world. And otherwise, it will not function, because no countries are self-supplied in mineral raw materials. If we then consider the rares, which are now key to the energy transition, then it's very much the same system of that we have mineral exploration, we have mining and transport and a lot of processing, etc. But first of all, new mines, they will have to produce into a limited, although fast growing market. It's a limited market. So they will have to find their shares within that one. And also China is a dominant producer of the mining, as well as the treatment of the ore and manufacturing of the goods. So it's a complicated system to make this work. And because of this China dominance, then, which means that they somehow form a bottleneck in the system. The world outside China is not completely free to do whatever. They have to be sourced by China. Then, therefore, the EU Commission has created this list and defined that the rare earth elements are economic important to Europe, and they also have a very high supply risk, and therefore they are considered as critical, and even very critical to the industry in Europe. What are we talking about? We are talking about 17 elements, and they are not earth or soils, they are metals. And it's based on say historical reasons that they have this strange name. And one more thing, they are not geologically rare, so they're even more plenty than gold and platinum. So it's not that bad from a geological point of view. And in each of the various minerals, all of these various elements are say it's a compound of all of these, but the ratio between them varies. So and that matters for the feasibility of the exploration projects. How is the supply chain constructed? Yeah, first of all, we have this various mining and processing, and these days approximately 60% is mined within China, and then in addition to that, they are sourced from Myanmar and other places, Australia as well, and so. But when it comes to the processing part, then China becomes more and more dominant. So when we have this refinery of oxides and metals, then China is completely in control. And that's very much because they have a long expertise, and it's a complicated process. And they have also, after all, a strong filing of IP rights, which is required in this. So they have a stronghold on the treatment from almost from ore to final product. So the question is now, if some of the new projects not only in Greenland, but some of the projects elsewhere as well, come on stream. Where are they going to get their ore material sourced or processed? Will they, and to what extent can they do it themselves? And will there be new supply chains outside China? I'll discuss that a little bit further. But moreover, the sectors, the industrial sectors, they are specific for each of the rare earths. So there's, say, some special sectors which are consuming special rare earths. So, and in this figure, we can see that we have magnets and metal alloys, which are some of the expensive and very, say, sophisticated products, and therefore high priced. And also some of the elements here are a little bit more scarce than some of the other, and therefore higher priced. So that's the upper part of the figure is the upper end of the value, and the lower part slightly lower. And also, if we see it here, then we can see that it's illustrated in a different way, that each of the sectors, they demand specific rare earths, and some of the cheap ones, that's lanthanum and cerium, which are La and Ce, and they go into some of the metallurgical processes and also to catalysts and polishing and that sort of stuff. And so that's what the industry, new industry and new mines, they have to face, that they will need a market offtake for all of their products, not only for magnet. The economy will rely on all of it. So for the past, say, 15 years about, there's been a strong exploration efforts on new mines for rare earths around in the world, in particular in Australia, in Africa, and Canada, US, and in particular also Greenland has been very much in focus. And we have now, I have here listed approximately I think 50 of the new projects, but I guess there's more than 150, but not as advanced as these projects are. The figure as well in a square shows where the mines are, and they are in China, US, Myanmar, Australia, and Madagascar. That's the main producers, and then a little bit in India, Russia, Thailand, and Brazil, and a newcomer in Burundi. But some more are on its way. So it's not only Greenland, but many other projects are very much the same advanced stage. But in Greenland, we have, not only the two we normally talk about, Greenland and Kvanefjeld. There's actually 8 different deposits, and but most of them are now dormant. Safardok has recently, say, restarted their exploration, but Greenland and Kvanefjeld is the advanced project. In South Greenland, we have 2 of the projects shown here, and they are part of the same geological story, but different. So they differ in terms of mineralogy, and also that one has the uranium, and the other one does not have uranium. And as it was Hans mentioned, uranium is very much a topic and the political issue nowadays. So the future of this project is very uncertain. So and for Greenland, they are actually aiming at European supply chain. But it's a little bit unclear how they are going to organize that, because the facilities are not yet available within Europe. Greenland, they estimate that, or stipulate that they will have a production of about 30,000 tons annually, and 5,000 tons for Greenland. And that's a substantial amount if we compare it with the approximately 200,000 tons total of rare earths annually. So China is very much say regulated and by the central Chinese government, and they have organized it with the big six, as they are called, six big corporations, and mining, and actually not only mining, but developing also in vertical, the more or less the entire value chain for the rare earths. And it's organized a little bit in the way that they get different quotas, and because they have different composition of the rare earths, so this allows China to ensure that the supply very much fits to the demand by the industry. And so that's why they don't have exactly the same. And each 6 months they announce the quota for the next following 6 months, and we can see that it has increased. Total quota has increased since 2018 from 122 and now 145, and it's probably around 160 this year in total. So it's a very, very high amount of the total consumption. Here is say a table showing the strategy or the various policy regimes over time, how it has developed. And also, I think it should be stressed here that China is as well, they do as well have environmental policies. And because some of the Chinese mines have very severe impact, negative severe impact on the environment. And China is, say, working on that one. And apart from that, I'll say that the setup here is very much so it favors actually the production of domestic raw materials, and also to have the added value as long as possible before they export. And moreover, they do actually tax imported separated goods if they are separated for further treatment within China. So it's a negative competition. Actually, it's difficult to compete with the Chinese groups because of this setup. I'm sure that Jesper will discuss this a bit further afterwards. If we look at the demand forecast, we can see that if we just look at the magnets for electrical vehicles, and that's what we discuss again and again, and it's actually not only for electrical vehicles, it's for wind turbines as well. But here is a table just for the electrical vehicles. It's estimated that approximately 15,000 tons of neodymium, which is the critical one here, and is required in 2013. So it's a steep increasing curve on the demand side. And in addition to that, some of the other neodymium demands should be considered. So there's, on top of this, there are other demands. But how does this supply forecast say fit into this demand? This estimate we did a couple of years ago, but I think it's somehow still valid. And where we are trying to assess the production from each of the provinces. And we can see that approximately 35,000 tons of neodymium ND could be produced in 2030. And in addition to that, we have the existing projects. Here I haven't increased the production over time, but just kept it steady. So another, say, 40,000 tons from countries outside China. And in addition to that comes the unknown amount, really. What comes from some of the new projects? And some of the projects you will see on the list here are no longer existing. Some are dormant for the various reasons, but new projects has say replaced them. So it's my feeling that it's not too far from what could be a realistic scenario, provided they are allowed in by China.
It's time to wrap up here, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
So now we are talking about, there's a lot of discussion about trying to set up value chains outside China, and there are some efforts in US. For instance, the uppermost figure with Chemours and Energy Fuels and Neo Materials. And it's a very big project and funded by the State Department. But both Chemours and Neo Materials, they have strong Chinese operations as well. So it's not easy to say if it's China one. And the same actually for a small one in Angola, which tries to introduce raw materials to UK and processes there, and that project has, at least to some extent, been funded by China. So what is actually, when is it completely free and independent of China? It's not easy to say. So in summary, I'd say that the geological reserves, they are sufficient for at least 200 years and more. So that's not the issue. And currently the mine production is also quite okay. And a growing part is actually supplied by rest of world countries. But the fast growing demand for the green energy transition has to be, say, acted upon. So, and therefore we have all this exploration, but there are some constraints, and that China is still sitting on this, and we don't have outside China, we don't have the middle and downstream rare earth production and facilities, and the industry is consuming it. And we have this tax and VAT policy in China, which also makes it difficult. So then long-term strategic state or super states support is required to challenge China's dominance in the sector. And we can see that US has actually acted on this, and they are supporting the industry heavily. In Europe, it has not yet come to the same extent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Per. That was really exciting and illuminating. And I will give the floor now to Mads Kvist Frederiksen. Go ahead, Mads.
Mads, du skal lige unmute dig.
You need to unmute yourself.
Perfect. 1 year later. A lot of it is a perfect follow-up from what Per was saying, because we are looking very much at the supply chain. So I will just skip the one where it's used. We already heard that it's used in our mobile phones and our cars and our wind turbines. And these are in high demand and highly competitive and price sensitive, the industry. A lot of people also talking about defense. Currently, the US Army is using, US defense is using 1% of rare earth elements. So there's also an issue there, but it's a relatively small issue. But if you're, let's say you're a manufacturer, hypothetically a manufacturer of wind turbines, then you have some drivers to look at when it comes to rare earth elements. It's the cost, it's environmental security. You have some supply chains issue, as we heard about, and then we have some solutions of how to deal with this. So what I will do now is just go through some of these one by one. Here we have Siemens Gamesa from the annual report where they talk about the rare earth permanent magnets. And they have an ambition, and I think this is important to focus on, to reduce and eliminate the use of heavy rare earth elements because of economic, environmental, and social sustainability. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the demand we see now is a demand that will be there the next 10, 20, maybe 30 years, but then hopefully like companies are aiming to eliminate the use of rare earth elements. So it's also a demand, it's an issue that has to be dealt with now and not in 50 years. So the drivers for companies is one thing is cost. What's the cost of rare earth elements? That's what, are the consumers willing to pay more to get a wind turbine produced with rare earth elements from Greenland rather than China? There's the environmental issues. Very much we heard about in Greenland, it was an environmental issue. And then there's the security, and that's a supply chain security, but also geopolitical security aspect. When we talk about supply chain, we have done this both with Corona, but also we just saw with Evergiven recently. We have gone from this companies are starting to, for many years have had this supply chain of just in time. You don't store too many things in warehouse. You can get everything from China. And now companies are starting to look at just in case. What happens if we get a new pandemic, if a new ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal? So how do you deal with this? And this follows up from what Per said, is that China sits on everything. So if you want to be able to deal with this supply chain challenge, you basically have 3 options. You can either persist and say, we're going to continue sourcing from China our magnets or rare earth elements. We will adapt our supply chain, or we'll completely transform our supply chain. What we see right now, especially in the past year, is a lot of companies are adapting their supply chains. This is not only within raw materials, but within a lot of issues. I brought this one is from Ørsted, that many of you knows, and they basically said, what are the most important sustainability challenges, both for the business, for the company, and for the stakeholders. And they put the minerals and metals for green energy deployment, which is basically rare earth elements in this case, in the lower quadrant. And there's 2 points for this. One thing is that, yes, rare earth elements are important, but they're still only a very, very small part of the products that are being produced. It's a key part, but they are trying to eliminate that to be a key part in the long run. Another issue is also, this is very much of an environmental and sustainability take from many companies, not only Ørsted, and we will see why that is. So very much, and I'll get into details in the next slide, but very much companies are looking at reducing the amount of rare earth elements, especially magnets. They're looking how can we reuse our products and how can we recycle better. So these are 4 companies that many of you know, and I've taken some of their quotes from their annual reports on rare earth elements. All the companies are focusing on the rare earth elements, and Siemens Gamesa already started in 2011. That came the same time there was a disagreement between China and the rest of the world around rare earth elements around that time. There was a small minor trade war with Japan. So Siemens Gamesa has since 2011 looked at reducing their use of rare earth elements. I think what is interesting is Grundfos particularly has trying to map the sustainability impact of their rare earth elements in their supply chain as one of the first in the industry. And this is very much of a trend we see because of the Sustainable Development Goals and CSR, that companies are mapping their supply chains more. But they're also starting to design for the recycling of magnets. So companies are starting to look at how can we recycle more and more. But the final goal for all these companies, and also for the next big player, which is Apple, is basically to be completely independent from the use of rare earth elements. So Apple announced 4 years ago that they will not use, their ambition is not to use rare earth elements in the future. It's very, very tough for them. It's not going to happen overnight, definitely not. But it's just to say the companies are basically trying now to say, how can we become independent from this? Last 3 slides. We have seen that there's definitely been an increased production of rare earth elements, and every time we see a financial crisis, there's a small dip. But what I want to do is I want to look into the past 10 years, because I think it's easier, because we have to look 10 years ahead. So 30 years ago, the US controlled most of the global rare earth market. Then China came in the mid-90s and started producing. What happened in 2010 is there was a conflict between Japan and China decided to withhold some ships that were supposed to be shipped to Japan. And inside these ships, there were actually, and the Chinese apparently didn't know about this, but there were rare earth elements, produced magnets, and that suddenly changed the whole the pricing of rare earth elements because of this conflict. So prices spiked. What also meant is that a lot of car manufacturers in Japan that use these rare earth elements, they start adapting their products. So the cars suddenly they start using less rare earth elements in Japan. But what also happened is because the prices spiked from abroad and people saw, okay, we're dependent on China, a lot of companies in Europe decided to say, we'll manufacture in China because they have the rare earth elements. Then there was a conflict with the World Trade Organizations for a couple of years. And in 2012, there was a decision, a ruling that basically went against the China about how they could price it. So the prices went down. China also decided to overfloat the market with magnets and rare earth elements products. And a lot of companies starting to stockpile, which is quite normal. For the next years, basically it was only China making money from these rare earth elements for many, many years, and they were doing a very good job at producing it as well. They had the know-how, they had the IP rights, but around 2015, companies start seeing that, okay, maybe we should start producing outside of China. So we have seen a steady growth in production outside of China. It's still not even close to China, as we heard from Pierre. That's the key. And it's still, and I hope we'll get into that from Jesper, because it's becoming a more and more strategic issue for China. Here we have Xi Jinping, who in 2019 went on a completely normal visit to a magnet factory in China. And basically what he wanted to say is, we control this market. And there was also a threat of using what they called at the time called the nuclear option, which was to hold back all the magnets produced in China. And this was a part of the trade war between Donald Trump and China at the time, and Xi Jinping. But this will start being used as a threat from China to say, we sit on 90% of the market. And that's why companies are also starting to diversify their supply chain. So one thing is obviously it's environmental, but it's also a sourcing issue. So final point here is that, obviously, as we saw from Pierre, locations, there are minings everywhere, but are consumers willing to pay more to have sustainable mining? If companies, if US, as we heard from Pierre, has to build up their own supply chain, manufacturing all of this costs a lot of money. Are customers willing to pay for suddenly having a very small local supply chain rather than having the cheap? As we saw in Greenland, are people willing to have a mine in their backyard? Right now, the mines in Greenland, maybe people are happy with this. what markets are interesting, and I think the final point is also, will we see future trade wars in the future? Right now, there's starting to be partnerships in Europe and the US around the rare earth elements. So definitely we'll see more partnerships, but we'll also see more trade wars. And lastly, I just want to, and Pierre didn't mention this, but there's been in the recent years, there's been a focus, especially from Equinor, which is the former Statoil, to look at deep sea mining. And they also have an ambition. That's not only rare earth elements, it's also cobalt and so on, but actually start mining in deep sea. And this is it's a big debate in Norway right now, if that's the future of mining for sourcing as well. So that's a whole new story. And then we get back into the sustainability and the environmental issues if the customers are ready for deep sea mining. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mads. That was really, really interesting to get the industry perspective on this. And now I will give the word to Associate Professor Jesper Zeuthen for a discussion on China's rare earth politics and strategies.
Yes, thank you very much. So I think both Pierre and Mads have clarified that there is indeed a rare earth element strategy in China. So I'm not going so much into the details of that. I'm more going into looking at how people around that strategy sort of, what does it mean having a strategy for something? And I'm going to start with an image that has nothing to do with mining, as you can see, of why I thought China was interesting to start with. And it started back in primary school when I heard about China, which was this huge country with no famine and just so different from all other developing countries. And in that perspective, we maybe shouldn't forget that having a developing country monopolizing one single commodity, I mean, it may not be good for Denmark, but is it that bad for the world? And I think as a sinologist, I can see other things about what China does as a state that are worse than what they do with rare earth elements. It may not be bad to Denmark what China does to Xinjiang, what China does to Taiwan or Hong Kong, but it's sort of from an ethical perspective, I guess it's slightly worse. So that's just something I would like us to remember, that this is also just some kind of maybe state supported, but it's still some kind of business that we're looking into. So what I'm going to try to do is presenting sort of I'm going to start out with what is the reception of this when Denmark and mainly Denmark met this rare earth element strategy, and how did we interpret it, and then how Chinese stakeholders cope with having this strategy. So what do they do? And I'm going to focus that on Zhonghe, the one company that invested in Greenland mining and energy. So if we're looking at the reception of sort of Chinese rare earth elements mining strategies, then you can see that this was also what was presented in 2013, when I guess the focus on mining, Chinese mining in Greenland was also very large, when we had these exceptional laws being passed for having a lot of workers working on, and this whole great scale law was being passed. They can see also that this monopoly on rare earth elements was presented, and it was something that was part of the discussion. But it was taken, I guess, some steps further. If you're looking at what Claus Hjort Frederiksen said, he said, well, Greenland might just end up as some sort of Chinese appendix. And I guess the furthest I've seen it taken is when I did a presentation of China and Greenland, and people asked if the people that Royal Greenland had invited to Greenland weren't part of a fifth column. And of course, this is very far from being true. So it's just that when we're looking at what does it mean when China has a strategy, we have to be clear about, is it all Chinese? Is it some Chinese? Is it a very top state level thing? Or is it the worker in the fishing factory that we're talking about? And I think we should be very aware that this is something that's an elite thing. It's not something that sort of all of China thinks about. It's not one of the issues where you hurt China's feelings. I mean, SIS hurts China's feelings when they start writing that you can actually take a plane to Taipei in Taiwan, but we don't necessarily hurt Chinese feelings by saying we can do rare earth elements ourselves. But as you have sort of stated, all of you, and then it's also written in the report, then China does have this very clear strategy on rare earth elements, and this is, I guess, the most famous quote for this, that where Deng Xiaoping back in 1992, when he regained power after 1989, basically said that the Middle East has oil, but China has rare earth elements. That's sort of a quote you very often use to say, well, that there's some emphasis on how you can use rare earth elements in various strategic ways. And as Pierre and Mads have already said, then when we're talking about this Chinese monopoly in rare earth elements, then it's not really the minerals that China has a monopoly on, it's the processing of the rare earth elements that you see a monopoly on. And I think both Mads also presented that there was this 2010 case, which also showed, I think, some of the weaknesses of China's RE monopoly, because it wasn't in fact a very effective monopoly. China wanted to stop the export of rare earth elements to Japan, but because the political center in Beijing did not actually have the full control of the producers of rare earth elements, it was still possible for local Chinese businesses to export rare earth elements to Japan. So it didn't really halt the automotive industry the way that Beijing maybe had expected it to do. So it was quite clear that there was something wrong with the way that China was governing rare earth elements back then. And there was also a demand for changing the way that you would govern the rare earth elements from the WTO verdict, which I think you also mentioned, where it was sort of the verdict's was ruled that China was indeed monopolizing RE by using export quotas. That's not something you could do within the WTO framework. And you also saw how how countries around China were also aware that of this rare earth elements monopoly. So in 2009, there was this a Chinese company, actually a Chinese company that's the mother company of the one that used to operate at Citron, but doesn't do so much that anymore, tried to purchase a part of Linus, which is one of the few processing plants of rare earth elements. And that wasn't, I mean, the Australian authorities stopped this purchase. So it's something that has played a role. If you're then looking at how this RE sector, which is then going to be what will produce these things, how that's operated in China, then as Pierre was talking about, after this WTO verdict, a number of sort of the big six companies have been established, or they were there, but they have been sort of they are given the production quotas. So if you want to produce rare earth elements, then you need to be linked up to one of these 6 big companies. And this meant that many of these small producers, which in the past were exporting or smuggling out rare earth elements to, for instance, Japan, when you didn't want to export them, they were closed down. They were closed down either because they didn't get a production quota, or because environmental issues became more important in sort of Chinese politics. So the ones that were polluting the most were also more likely of being closed down. So we'll have basically less actors in the rare earth elements market, and then hence it would be more easy to govern. If we're then looking at Zhonghe, then we have a very peculiar company. This is the company which bought a share in Greenland Mining and Energy, the company that has the license for Kvanefjeld. Because Zhonghe is a very interesting company, within the Chinese mining sector, you have some companies that are fully state-owned and some that are in different ways state-reliant. Zhonghe is sort of in between. So when I wanted to meet with Zhonghe, I contacted the company, and then I also got to talk to the director, and the director said, "Oh, but we'll meet at the geological survey instead," because he was actually both a director in both places. So it has some personnel from where it started, from the subdivision of the geological survey. It has investments both from private actors and from other state-owned companies. And this means that it becomes a company which can benefit from all systems. This is something, when you're reading investment blogs in China, then they will say that Zhonghe is sort of benefiting from both worlds, because it needs to have, it's not sufficiently owned by one state-owned entity to not be allowed to export outside of China, to invest outside of China. If a company is I think more than 20% state-owned by one entity, by one state-owned company, then it needs to apply to invest outside of China. But Zhonghe doesn't need that. It's also less enough state-owned to be allowed to invest in, for instance, Australia. If the share owned by one state-owned company is very large in a company, then the Australian authorities will not likely allow investment from this company. So this is why they could buy a share of Greenland Mining and Energy. On the other hand, it's sufficiently state connected to get loans from state operations and being able to work within the political system. So it's sort of in between in that way. So it has a business model where it can try to work with different strategies, and you can speculate about what kind of company it is. Now we can look at the stock prices of GME over many months. As you can see, it wasn't a very good news for GME that the outcome of the election on April 6. And you can also see that it was probably expected in the markets that there might be a political issue, because the rate of GME has fallen throughout 2021. If you're then looking at Zhonghe, you can see quite a different picture. This is the development of the rate of Zhonghe. And as you can see, it did fall. I mean, the top one is from all of the year 2021, and the bottom one is the days around the election. There was a fall, but there was a decline in the rate, but it wasn't very high. This is, of course, partly because it's a much larger company than Greenland Mining and Energy. It has many other interests. But I think it also raises the question of what one of the bloggers on the finance sites in China was asking is it actually good or bad for Zhonghe what happened in Greenland? So that was a question which was asked in this forum, and we don't know. I mean, what Zhonghe could get out of getting a part of the Kvanefjeld project could be, since Zhonghe has also invested in facilities outside of China to do this processing of rare earth elements. You could, and since it has access to some of the big six companies, it has some of the projects co-owned with the big six companies, it doesn't necessarily have access to as many quotas as the real big six. So there could be a deal with going outside of China to invest, because it has a lot of expertise within rare earth elements, within the whole techniques that you need for exploring and exploiting rare earth elements. And then at the same time, so that could be something that would be interesting for it. On the other hand, you can also see, I mean, if you're looking at the interest of China in the Kvanefjeld projects, then it could be an open question. What is the real interest? Is it developing Kvanefjeld and having some degree of Chinese interest, or is it that it doesn't get developed? So that might be what you could see in the question of, is this a good or bad news for Songhe, this recent election? So these were my words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jesper. Really exciting. I'm sure we'll return to this in the Q&A. And now for our local Arctic expert, Ulrik Bram-Gad, and a discussion on how all of this looks from Greenland. Go ahead.
I'll just try to find the right screen to share with you. Hopefully this works. First, I'll take you very briefly a summary to what happened a couple of days ago at the election, and then I'll try to put that in context and speculate a bit about what this election means in relation to mining and to international relations. The main thing to say here, if I can get the slides moving.
Ulrik, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
you have shared the wrong screen. If you have several screens.
You want another one?
Please, because I can see your notes on your left. All right, sorry.
We'll try, perhaps this is the better one. Do you like this one?
Just waiting. Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting.
No problem. So what happened a couple of days ago was, in a sense, a landslide election. You see here two maps of Greenland. The last election, the EA left-wing party was largest in two of the municipalities. This time, the left-wing party overcame the center Social Democrats in another couple of municipalities. So something really happened here, and part of it, other things happened as well, but part of it was supposed to materialize now on the next slide. Here, part of it happened in southern Greenland, where this is the numbers from the municipal election, where the EA party really switched places and with the Siumut party, and that was arguably mainly because of the Guanasuit Kvanefjeld project that EA was opposing and Siumut was favoring. And then, what does that mean for the project? At least when you listen to the who is possibly going to be the new premier in Greenland, Mutti B. If you listen to him, kind of the only ultimate demand that he was really square with both before and after the election has been that whatever we do in those coalition negotiations that are going to happen now, we're not going to allow the Guanasuit project to continue. This is, I put this quote in Danish because it sounds good in Danish. I'll try to translate it into English. The journalist asks, so this project nothing will come from it. You have to listen to the people, and the people have spoken. He answers. So nothing will come of it. Nothing will come of it. So that's kind of the message he's been giving both before and after the election. And if you count the members of parliament in Greenland, you need to count 16 to have a majority. And then there are now a majority of MPs representing parties who don't want this project to continue. There are other stumble stones for the formation of a coalition. So these parties are quite far away from each other on other questions, but my best prognosis will be that there will be a government led by the EA party, and they will not allow this project to continue. And then, of course, you might ask Per about whether that means the end of the project, or at least the minerals stay underground, and then of course somebody else can suggest to dig them up at a later state, and the company and the investors spend some millions on developing the project, so they'd probably like to continue in some shape or form. But for now, my best prognosis is that it'll end. So now I'm going to zoom out and tell you why this election, in a sense, was about the Guanajuato project, but in my analysis, it's not really what was the only thing. And to understand the future dynamics, I think you should really not focus too much on this project and draw too wide-ranging implications for the future of Greenlandic mining from this election. And of course, what I'm going to say now might sound like I have a privileged access to what goes on in the mind of Greenlanders, and I don't. I'm neither a psychoanalyst or a mentalist, but I've been reading and listening a lot to particularly what Greenlandic politicians say, and these are what I'm going to present you with are the patterns I find in those political positions and policy narratives that they present, and they must have some kind of resonance with the electorate, of course, since the politicians are elected and re-elected. I can see from the list of participants that I have part of my empirical material in the audience, so I hope very much that you will intervene and protest if I say something which is widely off in relation to what you think in Greenland. I'd like to start with this picture because I think it really tells a lot about Greenlandic politics. It's an image that everyone who's ever been to Greenland has seen, because it's in Kangerlussuaq, the main airport, where there's this wonderful signpost pointing out all kind of directions. I think it was left there by the Americans who originally built the place as an Air Force base. The point is that there might be all these signposts, but all the planes go to Copenhagen, and all the ships until recently importing freight and exporting freight goes to Denmark as well, and all the people who are going to have an education goes to Denmark, and all the most of the workforce that Greenland doesn't have itself, it imports mainly from Denmark. So the point is that in my mind, when Greenlandic politicians are talking about independence, it's also, or maybe even mostly, about diversifying dependence. That Denmark takes up much too much of the horizon when you look at the world from Greenland, and that's really the main project of a lot of Greenlandic politics, is to find out ways, not getting rid of Denmark, but getting Denmark down in shape, in size, by diversifying dependence. So Denmark looks like a straitjacket, and that should be escaped. So Greenland has been for decades engaging other powers, the US, the European Union, and of course that's how the official Greenlandic reply, we could call it, to Trump's offer to buy Greenland should be interpreted, right? That we're open for business, we're not for sale, and that should be taken literally. And this courting other parties than Denmark also involves China, and this picture here is from 2017, as I remember, and incidentally, the guy number 2 from the left is the one who's probably going to be the new premier. He was at the point in time the Minister for Raw Materials on this tour arranged by the Danish embassy for Greenlandic ministers to engage Chinese investors and companies. And his was one of the main roles. There's a Minister of Fisheries and other ministers as well, but it was one of the main purposes of that trip as well as others, was to get Chinese investors into Greenlandic mining, and that, in a sense, that very much was one of the main strategies after Greenland got elevated itself to self-government in 2009 and got jurisdiction over the extraction of minerals. That one place to look for investors were China, and the IEA Prime Minister at that point in time, Kubi Kleist, were asked by a journalist, are the Chinese worse than other capitalists? Well, once the Europeans colonized the rest of the world, they've ruthlessly exploited everything. Now the economic center is shifting to the east. And in a sense, this quote tells you a bit about that. Really, there's a certain current in Greenlandic politics that says that we need to get something out of engaging with the outside world, and we don't really care who helps us or who we are struggling or negotiating with. The one is not better than the other. There are, of course, counter voices, and perhaps increasingly they've been heard recently. The Chinese state has had some dealings directly with the Greenlandic authorities, and at some points there were, like in Denmark, Tibetan sympathizers who used that as a protest, and the Greenlandic foreign affairs authorities are getting used to finding out how to react in those kind of situations. The newspaper clippings I have here is from one of the leading candidates from the EA party who was re-elected to parliament, who explicitly warns about China. So I think there might still be an appetite for Chinese investments, but there's also a growing awareness in the IA party that China is not necessarily only doing nice things. However, if these are numbers I took from a very fresh foreign policy opinion poll that colleagues at University of Greenland conducted. If you ask Greenlanders, which they've done for the first time here, about alliance policies and foreign policy, if you look at the upper numbers here, there's really no one who in Greenland, or very few, who wants to follow the US very critical, very strict policies towards China. If you look at the lower numbers, it's meant as a question to ask people to decide what's most important, to have good economic relations or being able to put a clear standpoint in relation to foreign and security policy. And of course, this question origins in Europe, where we are almost all of us in doubt whether we should have should provoke the Chinese by saying that they shouldn't do what they do in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, or we should, and then we should risk the punishment in economic policies. The interesting slide here is numbers are actually the ones concerning the US, that when you ask the Greenlandic population, there are more people who think it's important to be critical towards US foreign policy than towards Chinese policies. And that probably has to do with the experiences with US presence at Thule, which are more clearly in the mind of Greenlanders than any other relation to the US, that economic relations don't take up that much place when you think about the US. So the point here is basically that that this election, if the IA party does what it wants, then this particular project will not go further, the one in Kvanefjeld, but Greenland is still open not just for business, but particularly to mining projects, other mining projects, and more generally, if Greenland could have it as it wanted, it wouldn't really care much about alliance policies. It would like to have particularly economic, but also other kinds of relations to all the powers of the world. Of course, there might be a situation where other parties don't want Greenland to have this, well, want them to be more monogamous, but that wouldn't be what the Greenlanders wanted, Greenlandic politicians. Yeah, so I take the chance to advertise where you can read more about this until someone else steals the screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrik. And now we go to the Q&A session, and we have a lot of questions here. I think I just want to start with you, Per, and ask you, based on your presentation, it seems that there is a lot of other mining projects all over the world, and some of them also close to realization. And we're also hearing from Mads that businesses are looking at other opportunities to substitute rare earth elements. What does this all mean for the future kind of business and strategic importance of the Greenlandic deposits?
I think, first of all, we have to keep in mind that there aren't two projects, advanced projects, various projects in Greenland right now. And I'll say, I think Ulrik mentioned that maybe the solution could be to wait and see and so on. But then my comment on that one is that uranium will still be there. So that issue, we can't say solve the issue just by waiting. And secondly, that say a delay may cause that other projects may come on stream because it's a limited market. So there's not room for all the projects out there. So and I should mention as well that the EIA hearing is ongoing, and I assume that one will have to come to an end, and that's I think in June. And at that time, maybe the GM may come up with a solution on how to solve some of the issues which could be acceptable. I don't know, but just that waiting will not move the uranium issue. The other project, Greenland, which is a smaller one, appears to be more straightforward. The problem is that their strategy is not to engage with China, but to engage with Europe. And Europe doesn't have the facilities to do this at the moment. So, and back to also what Mads mentioned, that there's a lot of substitution and trying to replace rare earths in all the applications, which means that for an investor's point of view, this is very risky. So they are not queuing up any longer. They were 10 years ago, but now they are not very eager to team up with new groups. So
and I just jumped in here, Pierre, because there's also some questions in the Q&A about this. Some of the listeners are asking, how long will it take Europe to duplicate, China's ability to produce rare earth elements? And there's also a question asking that from our own Luke Patey, what the Australians are also trying to produce rare earth elements, and Japan has backed efforts also. What is how likely is it that we will get in competition with China on the production of rare earth elements, and how long will that take if we decided to do so?
And it's not very easy to come up with a prediction on that one, but I'll say, first of all, if we look at the practical things to get Kvanefjeld up and running, that's a 2-3 year process. So from from a go is say issued, then another 2-3 years. But I'll say the establishment of the processing chains in Europe is maybe more complicated because it does involve several companies and several technologies, and also we have to keep in mind it's a very limited market. It's maybe 5,000 tons for Europe, so it's there's hardly any business case just to cover Europe alone. So I think the either we should try to source it from byproducts, which are also say organized somewhere in Sweden. They are working from LKAB, and in Porsgrunn from the Yara fertilizer raw materials. and some of the small chains are already there. We have the refinery in the UK. We have a small magnet producer in Australia. So I think it's more a question about building up without the big mining investments, and then step by step, and less investment and less risk.
Okay, thank you very much, Per. I think I want to jump to Ulrik Pramgade here and ask you, there has been a question also in the Q&A here about can Greenland just discontinue this project after an international company has invested a lot of resources in developing the Kvanefjeld mine. So maybe is there any discussion about the legal perspectives and the business perspectives of this situation in Greenland? And also, secondly, maybe it would be interesting, as I hear you from also for the international audience, to really hear what it is the Greenlanders voted against. Was it mining? Was it uranium? Was it both? Or what was it really in your interpretation that they voted against? Thank you.
First thing, I'm not a legal expert, but as I understand, the government of Greenland 10 years ago, at one step in the project procedures, had the GME sign a contract saying that the government could terminate the project for political reasons. So in that sense, the GME knew what risk they were taking, and they are not. They can't sue for damages. But I'm not a legal expert, so they might have a different position. As I followed the debates, the first thing that made a difference, particularly in southern Greenland for the electorate, was uranium. Maybe that's part of that made a difference nationally as well. But uranium. Secondly, the fact that this mine is not in the center of a city, but very close to Narsaq and in the middle of this area, which is basically an agricultural area, and they have very high hopes for ecotourism and stuff like that. It's not a remote place in any way. So I think that was the main reasons locally. Of course, the test case for that is whether the Greenland project, which Per showed us on the map, that it's basically just across the fjord, but doesn't have uranium. If that is developed to a point where it has to be seriously considered and it's allowed to go ahead, then this election was about uranium and stuff in the middle of a city. But we'll see. Generally, the politicians insist that we'd like mining, we'd like a lot more mining, not just not this one.
Right. Thanks. Maybe Mads, you could also come in here on the concern that this may discourage other businesses in investing in Greenland if a political process can, discontinue investments from one day to the other. How do you see that from an industrial perspective?
I think it's pretty clear, and you will hear it whenever you go to a mining event, that what companies and investors are looking for is predictable long-term framework conditions. They want to understand how would this look the next 10, 20, 30 years. And you have a lot of elections in Greenland, and it's a challenge if it's single issues like this, you know. So when, I mean, let's take an example like the Citronenfjord project in the far north right now is going on track, but maybe that will become an issue at one day, you know. So I don't think this is the best way to attract investors. Quite the opposite. Greenland is still a young mining nation in modern times, not in historic times, but in modern history is still a young, immature frontier economy. And the frontier economy attracts some investors, you know, the high risk takers, but definitely this is not it doesn't send the best signal that just a changing government can change this multi-million-dollar project.
All right, thank you. Jesper, let's turn to you a little bit here, because how do you think Chinese investors will receive this election? I mean, you already started to explore that in your presentation, and I was a little bit intrigued by what you said. Is this actually, you know, good for Chinese investments or not? I mean, were you trying to say that any which way China will somehow profit because the other projects will get more value, or what was your point when you said that it was a little bit difficult to see whether it was actually beneficial for China or not?
I think the point was that for China as a state, not developing another rare earth element deposit, which is not fully Chinese owned, but only partly Chinese owned, might be an advantage if you're looking at it from only the perspective of the rare earth elements.
Right.
That was sort of that
right.
point.
Has there been any political reception or political reaction to this?
I mean, it's not really. I mean, I could find some discussion in sort of investment fora about the Greenlandic election, but it's not something very big. But there has been overall a reaction to how Denmark and the US look upon China in Greenland. So when I talk to people involved in it, then it seems that they are more reluctant towards investing in Greenland. You could also see this from the airports. You would have the company that was making the bids not wanting to go there, stating that it was too difficult getting the visa. So if you're looking at the different places where China has had an interest, then they have more or less left most of those. So you had Isua, where I guess very little is happening right now. Then you would have the Citronenfjord, where it seems to be that the previous Chinese company involved has pulled out, and you would also see it in the case of now Kvanefjeld. So it seems that China is sort of, as from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at least, reluctant towards doing more in Greenland because it might backfire on how we view upon China. But this is more speculative, I guess.
Right. Thank you. Ulrik, there's also a question here that maybe you would want to address from Kubik Kleist. The issue has always been that both Europeans and the US only demands Greenland to keep away the Chinese without using the only tool in hand, namely investing themselves. So do you see this embrace of Chinese investments as maybe also a way to say that Europe and the US is not doing enough in Greenland?
The thing is that in my analysis, of course that would, seen from the Greenlandic perspective, that would be the ultimate tool for that we don't need the Chinese to invest, because we have sufficient European, Australian and US investment. The thing is that perhaps if Jesper's analysis is correct, the tools that the US and Denmark, perhaps whatever Denmark does behind the scenes, have used in relation to China have been sufficient, in the sense that for US perspectives, at least, the important thing for US is perhaps just not to have Chinese investments in China, in Greenland, of course. The US doesn't really need Greenlandic economic development. Maybe it's easier for the US to have Greenland dependent on Danish subsidies. I don't know. So this is really the situation Greenlandic politicians are in, that their main priority might be to have investments in Greenland, but maybe they're the only ones who have that main priority.
Right, so we have a question here from Greg Barnes, and I think that's maybe directed at you, Per. He's saying that his experience is that we are engaging with the US in many ways on technology, and that the Chinese bottleneck is not really a problem. So how do you see that, Per?
It depends very much what we are talking about. If Greg Barnes is talking about treatment of the ore from Greenland, it's very much, I agree very much. But technology related to the processing further down the stream is complicated. And also say at a certain stage, it's not just a question about the technology, it's also a question about offtake arrangement, long-term offtake arrangements. So these two things make it very complicated in combination.
There is also another question maybe for you, Per, from Dwayne Menezes. The UK is building the first major REE processing plant in Hull in Yorkshire and scaling up permanent magnet alloy manufacturing in Cheshire. So we are hearing from various places in Europe and elsewhere that industries are exploring and experimenting with the manufacturing rare earth. How do you see this development?
Yeah, again, I think I mentioned it. It's based on the ore coming from Angola, from Londonio. And first of all, right now it's just a pilot plant. And their aim is to produce a mixed rare earth carbonate. So after that, what then? And that's for many of the new chains that they very much focused on ahead of the magnet sector. But in order to survive, you need a wide range of industries. So I think the one in UK, it's not just around the corner, and moreover, the question is to what extent is it really a European project? Because the project in Angola is partly at least funded by China. So again, right. Maybe, yeah.
Well, there's one actually directed to you here, Per, again. So do you think the project at Greenland will be possible? I mean, the project close to Kvanefjeld without the uranium, will that be possible without Chinese influence one way or the other? Very direct question.
I agree with Greg Barnes very much. Of course, he's the owner of that project, so he should know. And I agree very much that the first part, yes, that can be done outside China for sure. But at a certain stage down in the chain, they will have to include the Chinese markets.
All right, thank you. There is a question here from Lil Bjørst, who's also a Greenlandic expert, and she's saying that it was mentioned by the media in Denmark that large profits were supposed to come from Kvanefjeld, and she's asking whether these numbers were really reliable, and what is the role of the media in the whole question about Kvanefjeld. And maybe Ulrik, you would want to say something about how the media has and why you think the media has placed such emphasis on the mining and the numbers there.
I have no competence in actually judging whether the numbers are right, that Greenland would make that kind of money and have that kind of employment, which the company claims. That's really out of my competence. I think in general, the company has been, of course, playing on two fronts, right? They've been telling about this project to investors, and they've been telling about this project to Greenlanders, and in both cases, of course, they want to tell about this as a profitable and not harmful project. So they've been telling good stories about themselves, and I think I generally actually think the Greenlandic media has been relaying these stories, but they've also been digging into to some of the complications and uncertainties of these projects. But of course, it's a massive communication effort which this company has been doing for decades, promoting this project. And I actually think perhaps the Danish and maybe the international media has been buying more into some of the most hyped versions of the positive stories, more than the Greenlandic media has done.
Thank you. Mads, I thought I would return to you and the question about industries substituting REE. I found that really interesting. And can you say a little bit more about that, the thinking behind that, and how advanced that is? Because as I understand it, also it's very difficult at the moment, and Pierre can maybe come in here, to actually substitute REEs.
It's definitely not an easy job. I spoke with Equinor, the former Statoil, and they are investing heavily in research in a Norwegian company called Beyonder. And Beyonder is using leftovers from wood from the forestry industry to produce batteries. And that's actually using this leftover from wood to create batteries. And it's a company that's been running for the past 5 years now, but now they got very, very large scale investments. Still, it's still in the R&D phase. I think we will see a smaller and smaller amount being used. So also when Apple goes out and say, the goal in the end is to have 0 rare earth elements in our products, they have some money, they have some R&D capacities, but it will take time. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think the first stage will be recycling and reusing the rare earth elements and the magnets. And then I do think there will be a substitution in the long run, but maybe that's me being optimistic.
Right, Pierre, could you maybe come in here? We only have 2 minutes left, but what is the perspectives in substituting REEs? Is it possible now? Will it be possible in the near future?
At least there's a lot of effort around doing it, and I'm sure that they will be successful to some extent. And in some applications, it is possible. But I would like to point to that we should be we should not only focus on the rares, because if we are replacing with other critical raw materials, then we have the same situation, and so maybe the idea is to downscale and recycle and substitute the best we can and diversify the production. And at least make sure if we replace the rares with other metals, then we have to make sure that that is more sustainable and less critical.
Right, thank you. Maybe Ulrik for a final comment on Greenland. Obviously, the IAA will need a majority to go in and stop Kvanefjeld. Where are the negotiations going at the moment, as you see it?
I don't have any special sources behind the closed doors where DIIS is serving coffee, but I think there are basically 2 options, right? The basic one would be to take on board Nalarak, which on the Nalarak party, they will supply the last 4 MPs they need, and then they have a majority against the Guanasuit project, but then they will have to agree on fisheries politics and language politics and general multiculturalism and the speed of independence. So there might be other stumblestones. The other option would be to invite Siumut into a coalition, but then we need to find out who's leading Siumut and what positions they are talking and taking, and they're generally in the process of reinventing themselves. So it might not be the most stable coalition partner, but I don't have special sources other than the news media.
All right, thank you all. Our time is up now. I just want to thank the panel for taking the time, and all for the many listeners out there. It's been really exciting, and that's it. Bye for now.
Thank you.